And get started. Allowing to the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, one God, amen. We thank you, Lord, for this day. And we ask that you'd open our minds and our hearts to studying your servant Joseph and for the journey of forgiveness he's on. We ask you, Lord, that you would help us to follow in those footsteps, for all of us are struggling with forgiveness with somebody. And we ask you, Lord, to please open up all our hearts in the journey that we're on, so that we may truly find freedom. Through the intercession of all your saints here, so we say, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done. Earth is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. Trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Christ Jesus our Lord, for thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. All right. So last week we spent a lot of time talking about forgiveness and how forgiveness was a process. And one of the things that we did do was put a definition, or at least a working definition, to forgiveness. Who remembers even parts of the definition that we put out last week? Even just key elements would be great.
Not holding a grudge.
Okay, that's part of it. Well, I gave a really nice, meaty definition. I can't memorize it.
Yeah, I tried to look at it last time.
Of course I can't memorize it. I can't memorize it. It's in front of me. All right. So just sharing the screen, and then I will do that. All right. So definition of forgiveness that I offered up last week, okay, was when unjustly hurt by another, we forgive when we overcome the resentment towards the offender, not by denying our right to the resentment, but instead by trying to offer the wrongdoer compassion, benevolence, and love. As we give these, we as forgivers realize that the offender does not necessarily have the right to such gifts, right? So I'll read it again, because it is a loaded definition. I should have put it on that sheet. I'll do it next time. All right. So definition, working definition of forgiveness is when unjustly hurt by another, we forgive when we overcome the resentment towards the offender, not by denying our right to the resentment, but instead by trying to offer the wrongdoer compassion, benevolence, and love. As we give these, we as the forgivers realize that the offender does not necessarily have the right to such gifts. All right. So that was kind of our working definition. And the key elements that I want us to remember is that, like, we need to work towards forgiveness when, think about it, we've been hurt, right? And the way we were hurt was unjust, right? They did it in an unfair way. So it's okay for us to be angry. It's okay to, for us to be resentful of them, but we have to make a choice on what to do with that anger and resentment, right? And we say, okay, even though I was hurt, I'm going to work towards, not denying that something happened, but rather, like, I'm going to work towards giving you that. All right, that's what we need to do when we work towards forgiveness towards somebody. All right, so just think, I was hurt. I'm not going to deny it. It was unjust what happened to me. But if I don't deal with the anger and resentment, it's going to consume me. And we talked about a lot of the effects of anger on us, especially long term, right? And I don't want that to consume me. And so instead, I'm going to try to work towards being able to give the person a gift instead. right? So that's kind of the process of forgiveness. And what we did is we talked about these 4 phases of forgiveness, right? 4 phases of forgiveness. And they're in the sheet in front of you, but we'll kind of cover it. Again, it says, phase 1, uncovering your anger. Have you avoided dealing with your anger? Have you faced your anger? Has your anger affected your health? Has the injury caused permanent change in your life? Or has the injury changed your world, right? So big things is that, we all try and deal with our anger, but a lot of times we do a really bad job of dealing with our anger. Or sometimes we try and ignore our anger. And frequently what that does is that builds up inside of us. It can affect our health, not just our physical health, but our mental health and spiritual health as well. It can also change us to, force us to change the way we see the world, right? The last one, has the injury changed your worldview? Sometimes we're injured in such an unjust way that it changes our perception of God, that we look at God and say like, there's no way you can exist if something like this happened, right? So that's when anger due to an unjust injury can really begin to affect us. So that's phase 1, is really beginning to be in touch with it, right? Phase 2 is deciding that what we've been doing to deal with our anger isn't working, right? And so a lot of times, like people end up with addictions because of anger that is undealt with, right? So they're really angry and they turn to pornography. They're really angry, so they go to drinking or gambling, right? Or shopping, shopping too much. So we pour out our anger in different ways, right? So when we decide that those behaviors aren't good, then we're in phase 2, right? And we have to be willing to begin that process of letting go, right? That's kind of what phase 2 is. It's this conscious decision. Phase 3 is working towards understanding the situation, the other person, the group of people, whatever it may be. We want to work towards understanding a little bit, and we want to work towards compassion. Okay. And part of that also is just also accepting that there is pain involved, right? That I'm going to have to carry a degree of pain. And we're actually going to see that today, where Joseph has to, at a certain point, just realize he's going to carry pain. He's not going to erase the pain of what happened. He's going to have to deal with it. And all of us, at a certain point, have to carry an amount of pain. And one of the ways that, I heard it articulated very nicely is we end up walking around with a spiritual limp, right? We've been hurt, and it affects us, and it still kind of haunts us, and we wrestle with it from time and time again. It's almost like a spiritual limp, right? And then we said that part of phase 3 is also giving the offender a gift, which again, that's not necessarily like sending them flowers, right? Giving the person who hurt us a gift can be as simple as, well, I used to totally drag you through the mud in my mind every time your name came up, but instead of doing that, I'm not. That's a gift, right? Every time your name would come up in conversation, I would badmouth you in front of other people, but I'm not going to do it. And maybe even I might pray for that person, right? That's a gift, right? That's a gift. Again, we don't have to befriend people that have hurt us. But the whole goal is to work towards our release of anger's hold on us, right? And that's a process, and that takes time, right? And in phase 4, all we do is we discover this release and freedom, right? And that comes when we are able to, after a period of time, look back on the injury, look back on the season of life and say okay, it was horrible and I hated it, but it taught me some things, showed me some things about myself, right? Helped me also see that I needed forgiveness as well for certain things that I've done to other people, right? And we also see that God was using this evil thing that happened for a greater purpose in life. When we're able to do that, and oftentimes that takes time, right? that takes time to be able to have a bird's eye view of seasons in our life where we're really hurt in order to see that there is a greater purpose being worked out, right? So that's forgiveness. There's 4 phases to think about forgiveness. Any questions on that? All right, great. So what we also, kind of talked about last week is just kind of setting up the scene where, the famine had hit, and about 2 years into the famine, Joseph's brothers, and the family who are in Canaan, they're like, okay, well, we need food, so we got to come back to Egypt. And Joseph sees them, and immediately he's triggered, right? He's upset, he's angry, calling them spies, these different things, puts them in prison. And this shows us, okay, Joseph is likely in phase 1, right? Because he's really struggling. He hasn't dealt with the anger, of being hurt. He's wrestled with it for many years, wishing that he was never in that situation. But now he's kind of come face to face to it, has to deal with it, and it kind of off guard, right? He wants 9 of the brothers to stay, and for only 1 to go back and bring Benjamin, right? So he puts him in a really bad situation, right? But remember what we're saying is that was his initial reaction. He let them simmer in prison for 3 days, which was probably better for Joseph than it was for them, because at the end of 3 days, Joseph kind of softened. And he was saying, okay, I'm going to keep Simeon, and the rest of you go back. But if you're going to come back, you bring Benjamin, right? And what we're saying there is that in this process of forgiveness, we get triggered, right? And there's a lot of emotions when we are trying to work towards deep forgiveness of sin. And that's okay, but we need to give ourselves breathing room, right? And Joseph clearly, he needed those 3 days, and he came back and softened up his tone, right? So forgiveness, we need gaps in between as we work through our emotions. So Joseph kind of sends them off on their way. He gives them all the grain, but then he puts the money bags in each of their sacks, and he sends them home. And the brothers get back home. We're like, oh man, we have our money too, right? So they really caught in a weird situation where he already accused them of being spies, and now they went home with grain and their money. So they were kind of caught, and it probably discouraged them from coming back to Egypt, because they knew they would have to address that issue. But they also knew that the condition for them to be able to go back to Egypt was if they had Benjamin, which is a whole point of contention at home, because Jacob doesn't want to let Benjamin go. He lost Joseph, and Benjamin, last son of the love of Jacob's life, which was Rachel. Good. All right. Any questions on where we're at? All right, so we're back in Canada. Simeon's chilling in prison, right? And food is running out. That's where we're going to pick up. Well, let's start with some questions. All right. What is something that you've kind of learned about forgiveness from last week to this week? It's good to share with us.
Discovery of deep emotions or feelings towards that certain person that causes you to be angry or
That's an important part of forgiveness.
The decision more than our natural emotions. Because if we follow our emotions, we will not forget them. So intentional decision.
That's a really good one. That when I first read through this, that was the point that really got me. That forgiveness is a decision that we make. And if we leave it only to our emotions, we will never want it, because it's easy, even though it's a lot more dangerous, it's easy to stay in a place of anger and resentment. Those are easy emotions, right? Unpleasant, but they're much easier to be angry and resentment than it is to be hurt. Very good point. I was like, when I cover this in here, like, it's important to, like, I have to remind myself that forgiveness, like, yes, there's phases, but like, you can bounce between phases, right? So you can like, do phase one, decide to forgive, but all of a sudden be triggered, and then you go back to phase one, right? Because you realize, oh, my anger and my hurt was a lot deeper than I knew. Because psychologically, like, we can suppress deep emotions. We can really suppress them, and we kind of need the right recipe of a situation or scenario to really bring up deep hurt. And so it's very natural when we're trying to go through the process of forgiveness to kind of like go back and forth, right? And that's not, going back and forth doesn't mean like we're not progressing. It actually does mean that we're progressing. When we go back to uncover new things, that is part of the progression. And that's actually very important. And we saw like Joseph too, like, he goes back and forth, right? And we see him kind of teetering and being like, oh, I want to give you a gift, but like, I'm going to give you a gift, but like, spike the gift, right? So, Joseph does that. Any other, lessons on forgiveness before question 2? All right. And reflecting on the phases of forgiveness, which one seems the most hardest to you? Which phase of forgiveness seems the most difficult? We have extra sheets. Okay. I remember that. Phase 2? Why?
Where the hardest thing to be actually being willing to forgive them.
Phase 2.
Phase 3, I think,
Mm.
because it's difficult to accept the pain. Like, it's not going to be an equal process where the other person feels what you felt. It's just going to be a one-way thing, and that is what it is. You're just going to have to move on from it.
There's no right or wrong. Everybody experiences differently. So
Phase 4, I think.
phase 4 is the hardest. Why?
I mean, like having those emotions and like thinking about them is one thing, but I think to be released from the prison of like those emotions to like drive you and drive your actions and like impressions to like everyone around you that you talk to is
It's hard to
really
get
hard.
there.
Yeah, it's really hard. It's given that you have been hurt and you feel like if you do like let go or release, they might happen again. And now you let your guard down.
So what is meant by the first point? Discover the meaning of suffering.
So, like, all of us suffer, but when we allow God to participate in our suffering, He uses suffering for something better. Right? So, for example, like Jesus suffered on the cross, but there was meaning and purpose to His suffering. We suffer, right, from the sins that people can commit against us. But that suffering that we go through can teach us, can reveal to us, like, so many things about what life decisions that we made. Like, so the suffering that we go through in response to hurt, right, can teach us, so many different lessons in life. And therefore we look at the suffering and say, okay, there's purpose behind it. I can see why I needed to suffer. Does that make sense? All right. Last question. What do you think are signs that would show that somebody has truly forgiven? This one's hard.
Not holding a grudge.
Right?
Sounds
Definitely-
pretty
definitely
easy.
part of it.
Clearly not forgiven if you're holding a grudge.
Yeah, I would say like a heartfelt change, you know, leading to repentance and prayer and love.
Mhm.
A change in action,
Mm.
like you have started doing things differently.
Mhm. It's a tough one. It's good for us to wrestle with that. And the reason why I bring that up is like, I think of all of us in different ways are wrestling to forgive somebody else. And sometimes like we tell ourselves like, okay, I forgive you. Right, and we totally haven't. Because and ways to see that we haven't are sometimes like in conversation, even if that individual is just in a group conversation with you and they say something and you come away and you're like, oh, like what a fool for saying that. And I'm going to remember that comment and I'm going to put it away for a rainy day and wait for me to be able to pull that out again. Right. So those are different, scenarios that can tell us like, I haven't forgiven this person. Right. Or when, having to come into close vicinity with them, like still feeling like all these different emotions like arise from us, that may kind of push us to think opportunistically, like, well, when the right moment is right, like I'm gonna come back, even though we've kind of told ourselves like, okay, I forgive them. But when our mind is still thinking like that, it's kind of signs that we haven't. Right. So it's hard, it's tricky one, but it's good for us to think like, what are signs that we have really forgiven? And this is like, we're going to see that at the very end of Joseph's life. Right. All right. Let's get on. So like I said, they're back in Canaan and the famine is getting bad. We're in Genesis 43. And so the family is now beginning to have a discussion on like, okay, we need to start thinking about more food, right? Because what we have is coming in. All right, so I'm going to start us off. We're going to read 1 through 7. Now the famine was severe in the land, and it came to pass when they had eaten up the grain which they had bought from Egypt, that their father said to them, "Go back, buy us a little food." But Judah spoke to him, saying, "The man solemnly warned us, saying, 'You shall not see my face unless your brother is with you. If you send our brother with us, we will go down and buy food. But if you will not send him, we will not go down. For the man said to us, 'You shall not see my face unless your brother is with you.' And Israel said, 'Why do you deal so wrongly with me as to tell the man whether you still had another brother?' But they said, 'The man asked us pointedly about ourselves and our family, saying, Is your father still alive? Have you another brother?' And we told him according to these words. Could we have possibly known that he would say, 'Bring your brother down'?" Right? So when we look at these verses, especially verse 6, where it says, "And Israel said, 'Why do you deal so wrongly with me as to tell the man whether you still had another brother?" Right? Jacob is always going to be Jacob. Right? He has his favoritism and it's interfering with his ability to clearly see the entire state of the family. Right? And now the potential existence and survival of the family is now hinging on Jacob's ability to let go of Benjamin. Right? And that's hard. He's willing to let Simeon die in prison. Right? In order to keep Benjamin safe. Right? And we're also getting a little bit of insight from scripture as to some more of the details in the conversation that Joseph was having with his brothers when they were back in Egypt, right? That clearly Joseph was poking and prodding and asking some like clear questions to figure out information that he felt was important, right? And that puts us where in our phases? What phase would you say Joseph was kind of uncovering when he was asking all these questions?
Phase one.
It could be phase one.
Guessing that's not the answer.
Could be phase one. I was wondering, like, I was asking myself, like, could it be a little bit of phase three because he's trying to understand, like, what's the situation, right? So kind of asking these questions to understand and get a sense of like, okay, what's the family situation like, right? But again, like, he can bounce around. It could be, very well could be, that like he's trying to uncover the depth of his anger by asking questions, right? So phases can overlap, but it's good to just see the process for what it is, right? So that's what we get a little bit from these verses. But what we also see is that Judah is rising. Reuben, who was the firstborn, kind of proved himself to be not a great firstborn and leader, and so he's fading into the background. Judah is really standing up to be the spokesperson of all the brothers, right? Let's go 8 through 10 in chapter 43.
Then Judah said to Israel his father, send the lad with me, and we will arise and go, that we may live and not die, both we and you, and also our little ones. If I myself will be assuredly for him from my hand, you shall require him. If I do not bring him back to you and set him before you, then let me bear the blame forever. For if we have not lingered, surely by now we would have returned this second time.
All right, great. So verse 10 is key because it's telling us that this process of debating over Benjamin is a long process. Like for Judah to be able to say, like, look, we could have been there and back. And we're talking about traveling to Egypt, getting food, and coming back and getting Simeon out of prison. Like, I mean, we're not talking about a weekend trip. We're talking about several weeks. So this is clearly an emotionally charged point of contention for the family, right? And eventually, Jacob is going to give it for the good of the family. So he's kind of been broken down and whittled, and like there's not much more that he can do. So he's going to give in and eventually say, okay, like you can take Benjamin, all right? And that's what we're going to read in 11 through 15.
And their father Israel said to them, if it must be so, then do this. Take some of the best fruits of the land in your vessels and carry down a present for the man, a little balm and a little honey, spices and myrrh, pistachio nuts and almonds. And take double money in your hand, and take back in your hand the money that was returned in the mouth of your sacks. Perhaps it was an oversight. Take your brother also and arise, go back to the man. And may God Almighty give you mercy before the man, that he may release your other brother and Benjamin. If I am bereaved, I am bereaved. So the men took the present and Benjamin, and they took double money in their hand, and arose and went down to Egypt, and they stood before Joseph.
All right, good. So pretty much they're saying, okay, let's prepare for the worst. Try and butter him up, get him all these gifts, take the money that he stuck back in our sacks in case it was a mistake, and we'll take double in case inflation and all this stuff, right? And so they're going back with Benjamin, and in the next several verses, we're going to see Joseph's reaction to seeing Benjamin for the first time, right? So there's a lot of verses here because we're covering a lot of chapters to wrap up our story, but, we'll try and digest the key points. So we're gonna read 16 all the way to 24. 16 to 24.
And I have a question.
Yes.
And why he asked for Benjamin without, of course, he would like to see his father after all these years. So why he asked for Benjamin alone?
That's a good question. My guess is it's probably because the journey is hard and he knows that his father is very old. And so much easier to ask for Benjamin than his father would be my answer to that, but I don't know for sure. We can read 16 through 24.
When Joseph saw Benjamin with them, he said to the steward of his house, "Take these men to my home and slaughter an animal and make ready, for these men will dine with me at noon." Then the man did as Joseph ordered, and the man brought the men into Joseph's house. Now the men were afraid because they were brought into Joseph's house, and they said, "It is because of the money, which was returned in our sacks the first time, that we are brought in, so that he may make a case against us and seize us, to take us as slaves with our donkeys." When they drew near to the steward of Joseph's house, they talked with him at the door of the house and said, "O sir, we indeed came down the first time to buy food, but it happened when we came to the encampment that we opened our sacks, and there each man's money was in the mouth of his sack, our money in full weight. So we have brought it back in our hands, and we have brought down other money in our hands to buy food. We do not know who put our money in our sacks." But he said, "Peace be with you, do not be afraid. Your God and the God of your father has given you treasure in your sacks. I had your money." Then he brought Simeon out to them. So the man brought the men into Joseph's house and gave them water, and they washed their feet, and he gave their donkeys feed.
All right. So what's happening here? Let me kind of unpack these verses.
He welcomed them in, gave them water, washed their feet, fed their donkeys. They were afraid that,
What?
yeah, they were afraid that they might be serving Joseph for stealing the money that they
Mhm,
gave, and that wasn't the intention.
mhm.
They didn't know how it ended up being there.
Yeah, so they're like, I mean, if you can describe what the brothers are feeling at this time, like, with one word, what would it be?
It was an unexpected welcome and unjustified because there is no reason that they are coming to our end to buy some food to be welcomed this way.
Mhm.
So,
Confused.
Yeah, confused. I look at them, I'm like, man, these guys have a lot of guilt. Because it's almost like they believe in karma, like what goes around comes around, because like every time something happens, they're like, oh gosh, it's because of Joseph. Oh, it's because of this. And so like guilt, really paints the way that we see and perceive everything. Right. And that, they felt guilty because their money was back in their sacks when they went back to Egypt, or went back to Canaan. And so there's guilt, there's a lot of confusion. I'm like, okay, why is all this happening? Right. So the brothers are really confused. Joseph is clearly like he's orchestrating things, he's setting things up. He very well could be working towards compassion, especially like as he sees like Benjamin is in the picture. Now, so it's confusing. We can't say with all certainty like what is going through Joseph's mind. But we look at like, okay, the actions. Do all of Joseph's actions like make sense? Not entirely. Right? Are all our actions going to make sense when we're trying to work through deep pain? No. Right? And so we have to learn to have capacity for the craziness that comes out of us when we work through our own pain, right? So that we actually can also, when we're accompanying somebody else in their journey, of forgiveness, that we can also have compassion on them. Because it's hard to work through deep emotions, right? And we don't know exactly what Joseph is doing. I don't know that he necessarily knows everything that he's doing, but he is responding to the situations. He is working through it. All right, let's go on. And I'll go ahead and read 25 through 30. Then they made the present ready for Joseph's coming at noon, for they heard that they would eat bread there. And when Joseph came home, they brought him the present which was in their hand into the house, and bowed down before him to the earth. Then he asked them about their well-being and said, "Is your father well? The old man whom you spoke, is he still alive?" And they answered, "Your servant, our father, is in good health. He is still alive." And they bowed their heads down and prostrated themselves. Then he lifted his eyes and saw his brother Benjamin, his mother's son, and said, is this your younger brother of whom you spoke to me?" And he said, "God be gracious to you, my son." Now his heart yearned for his brother. So Joseph made haste and sought somewhere to weep. And he went into his chamber and wept there. Right. So again, what do you think's happening with Joseph? An emotional wreck. Right. What are things that you are observing specifically with Joseph, right? There's a tension, but what is Joseph torn between?
I mean, he's trying to be show this face of a leader and not showing emotion, because often leaders think that they shouldn't show emotion. But at the same time, he hasn't seen his brother in so many years, and he just is overcome with emotion and has to hide basically, so they don't so they're not why is this man crying?
Very, very true, right? He wants his brother, right? Verse 30 says his heart yearned for his brother. But he's a leader, like you're saying. He's also got all his brothers on this wild goose hunt that they're not sure what's going on and why is it happening. And so he's carrying this tension of I want to be with Benjamin, but I'm angry at the others, right? I want my revenge, but I want my brother. Right. And it's common that as we're working through our own forgiveness, we want certain scenarios to just come, right? We want to be in certain situations, but then there's this anger, but I can't let go of this. That stop us from having this, right? But that's a very natural process, right? That's a very natural tension to hold on to. It's I want this, but I can't let go of this. Right? I want to be your friend, but I'm still really angry at you. Right? It's part of it. And we have to be able to appreciate that. And what's important for us to appreciate is that okay, if I want this, what's really stopping me? When we see things that we want, but yet we can't grab onto it, it should point our attention towards, okay, something's still holding me back. And it tells me that there's still more work that needs to be done. Right? But it also says that oftentimes we're the ones that hold ourselves back in the process of forgiveness. The brothers are actually they're being honest. Okay, we went back home, we found the money, so we got the money, here's more money for more food, and we brought you gifts. For once, the brothers are actually being honest people. Right? But it's Joseph. Joseph holds the key. We hold the key too. Right? And actualizing scenarios that we want, we hold the key. But a lot of times, like our inability to let go, hold us back. All right, let's read 30. Any questions? All right, let's read 31 through 34.
Then he washed his face and came out, and he controlled himself and said, serve the meal. So they served him by himself, and then by themselves, and the Egyptians who ate with him by themselves, because the Egyptians could not eat bread with the Hebrews, for that is a loathsome to the Egyptians. Now they were seated before him, first according to birthright, and the youngest according to his youth. And the men looked at one another in astonishment. He took portions to them from his own table, but Benjamin's portion was 5 times as much as any of theirs. So they feasted and drank freely with him.
Okay. So Joseph's clearly messing with them, right? He's starting to, drop clues that, like, I know a lot more than I'm letting on, right? Because he sets a table for them and he, gives them assigned seating, all according to their birthright in perfect like order. And then all of a sudden, like Benjamin gets the most. So he's also beginning to reveal a little bit of what's going on the inside, right? So that's what we have here. Chapter 44 is going to be like a big step in working towards Joseph's kind of completion or a big step in his journey of forgiveness, right? So let's read 1 through 6 in chapter 44.
And he commanded the steward of the house, saying, fill the men's sack with food as much as they can carry, and put each man's money in the mouth of his sack. And put my cup, the silver cup, in the mouth of the sack of the youngest, and his grain money. So he did according to the word that Joseph had spoken. As soon as the morning dawned, the men were sent away, they and their donkeys. When they had gone out of the city and were not yet far off, Joseph said to the steward, get up, follow the men, and when you overtake them, say to them, why have you repaid evil for good? Is not this the one from which my Lord drinks, and with which he indeed practices divination? You have done evil in so doing. So he overtook them and he spoke to them these same words.
All right. So Joseph sets him up and he tells his servants to put money back in the bag and take his like silver cup and where it says like, this cup, which he refers to as being part of his practice of divination. So when I was reading about this, saying that, put it like just directly, it's almost like witchcraft, if you will. Like they would use the cup and they would study the way like things float in the liquid of the cup, and as a result of how they see things floating in the cup, they would like prophesy that something was going to happen. Right. And this was like, it's pretty much saying like this was like a special cup that Joseph would use, right, in order to do this divination. And so for it to be found in one of their sacks was a bigger deal, right? It wasn't just like a little like makeshift cup. This was a special cup. So he was really framing them in a big way, right? According to Egyptian like culture at that time, right? So he's setting them up, and the brothers, like as they're overtaken by all the servants of Joseph, are just surprised. They're like, again, like, what do we do this time? Right? So 7 through 12 is kind of the brothers' reaction to this. I'll go ahead and read it. And they said to him, why does my Lord say these words? So this brother saying like, okay, why are you accusing us like this? Far be it from us that your servants should do such a thing. look, we brought back to you from the land of Canaan the money which we found in the mouth of our sacks. How then could we steal silver or gold from the Lord's house? With whomever your servant is found, let him die, and we also will be my Lord's slaves. And he said, now also let it be according to your word. Be with him whom it is found. Sorry, let it be according to your words. He with whom it is found shall be my slave, and you shall be blameless. Then each man speedily let down his sack to the ground, and each one opened his sack. So he searched. He began with the oldest and left off with the youngest, and the cup was found in Benjamin's sack. Right? So when you think, we see this kind of unfolding, they're standing up, they're like, this is baloney. Like, we were such honest men. We brought back the money. There's no way we should do something this foolish. Right? And I'm so sure of it, and this is Judah who's probably speaking, right? I'm so sure of it that if you find this cup, kill him. Right? But the response was, okay, when we find the cup in somebody's case, they'll be our slave, but you go first. Right? And this was clearly planted in Benjamin's. And so they go through, and just imagine like 10 brothers, like oldest sack, empty. Then go through 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3. And you get to like 2, and you're like, see, we told you. And then the last one, like the cup comes out, right? Can you imagine like what they must have felt? Not only because they said, like, if you find this cup, we're so sure that you're not going to find this cup, you can kill the person who did it and will be your slaves. And then all of a sudden to find out Benjamin's. Like, this is like a huge gut punch to the brothers, right? And Joseph sets this up. He knows the value of Benjamin to his father. And so it just, I don't know, you just see like, okay, Joseph is really like wielding his intimate knowledge of the family. Right? And so we're in this situation that Benjamin is now caught with this. And they are just struck because they know, one, if Benjamin dies, like, this is gonna be really bad. Judah already, promised and said, like, if this goes bad, you can, I'll take the blame of it and you can kill my sons, right? So, like, Judah has already put a lot on bringing Benjamin back. They know, like, their dad is not going to be able to sustain the loss of Benjamin. So this is just like a massive blow to the entire family, right? And then verse 13, we see their response. I'll read 13 through 17, where it says, then they tore their clothes, and each man loaded his donkey and returned to the city. So Judah and his brothers came to Joseph's house, and he was still there. So Joseph is waiting for them. He knew that this was going to come back. And they fell before him on the ground. And Joseph said to them, what deed is this that you have done? Did you not know that such a man as I can certainly practice divination? Right? Meaning, like, I saw this. He's kind of like imposing his whip trap on them, saying, like, it's because I can do divination that I knew that Benjamin, like, stole this. All right. Then Judah said, what shall we say to my Lord? What shall we speak? Or how shall we clear ourselves? God has found out the iniquity of your servants. Here we are, my Lord's slaves, both we and he also with whom the cup was found. But he said, far be it from me that I should do so. The man in whose hand the cup was found, he shall be my slave. And as for you, go up in peace to your father. What does Joseph want out of this?
I think he's testing them.
He's definitely testing them. What is he seeking?
Wants Benjamin.
He wants Benjamin. All right. Sorry, what were you gonna say?
I thought maybe he wanted to see how did they deal now with this favoritism, because obviously it's still favorite, but like, do they still harbor anger toward Benjamin as they did to him or not?
Yeah. And like, I really like your emphasis on the favoritism. Like we see that playing out. Like he clearly has a favorite to Benjamin. He wants Benjamin, right? And it's almost as if he's like, let me devise a plan so I can keep Benjamin and you guys get away, right? And so he's like, I'm going to keep Benjamin, but you guys are set free. So he's trying to have his cake and like kind of not deal with his anger, but like it's not really panning out the way that he wants. Because Judah steps in and he's like, there is no way we are going back without Benjamin. Right. But it's so interesting to see like the lengths that Joseph is going through in order to kind of reclaim a sense of family. But still he's struggling to deal with the anger he has, right? And the hurt that he has from the rest of the family. Right. The family's kind of messy. We're just gonna have to take it all together and you have to work through it all. So it's really cool, not cool, but like interesting to see like what Joseph is going through. So Judah jumps in, right? Let's see what Judah says in 30 through 34.
Now therefore, when I come to your servant my father, and the lad is not with us, since his life is bound up in the lad's life, it will happen when he sees that the lad is not with us, that he will die. So your servants will bring down the gray hair of your servant our father with the sorrow to the grave. For the servant became a surety for the lad to my father, saying, if I do not bring him back to you, then I shall bear the blame before my father forever. Now therefore please let your servant remain instead of the lad as a slave to my lord, and let the lad go up with his brothers. For how shall I go up to my father if the lad is not with me, lest perhaps I see the evil that shall come upon my father?
Right. So Judah's saying like, can't do it, just take me, let him go, we're really sorry. But there's no way, like I can't even go back and face my dad. Because once I go back and Benjamin's not with me, he's going to die. And seeing that happen on my watch is not something that I can bear. So just like, take me, I'll stay here. Right. And so like Joseph is just like, imagine like being Joseph in this moment. It's like the worst moment ever. Right. He's trying to figure out how to accept the pain, right, without acting out in pain, right? And what I mean by that is like what, this is a really painful situation. And he's trying to just say, give me Benjamin and you guys go, and I'll heal that way. But like pain is also driving his actions too, like where he's unable to suppress it, and it's causing him to just like rethink everything. Like plan A was, you guys go and I'll keep Benjamin. Well, plan A isn't going to work. Judah stepped in. Like, okay, well, I can't like let Judah go back not let Benjamin go back because it's really going to hurt dad, right? And dad's going to go down to his grave. And I love dad, I miss dad, and I don't want like to see that happen. So like he's just caught in this, right? And so he's trying to work through it. And it finally brings Joseph to a boiling point where he can no longer carry out the saga, right? And so we see like elements from like all phases coming out all in this boiling point. Like he's hurt, he's upset, there's anger, like he's still working through. He wants to forgive, right? But he wants to forgive in a certain way that like, he's just unable to do. So we see phases of like 1 and 2 in there. He's gone through trying to understand, trying to have compassion, because could have killed Benjamin on the spot, but he didn't want to kill Benjamin, right? He could have killed any of the brothers, but he doesn't want to kill the brothers. So like we see so much coming, right? Where it kind of puts him in this corner, and really what he's left with is like, okay, it's time to unveil the saga, right? And really square up with my brothers in order to take the last couple steps. Right? And that's what we see happening in chapter 45. So I'm gonna read, we're getting close to being done, okay? I'm gonna read 1 through 9 in chapter 45. Okay. Then Joseph could not restrain himself before all those who stood by him, and he cried out, "Make everyone go out from me." So no one stood with him while Joseph made himself known to his brothers. And he wept aloud, and the Egyptians and the house of Pharaoh heard it. Then Joseph said to his brothers, "I'm Joseph. Does my father still live?" But his brothers could not answer him, for they were dismayed in his presence. And Joseph said to his brothers, "Please come near to me." So they came near, and he said, "I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into Egypt. But now do not therefore be grieved or angry with yourselves because you sold me. For God sent me before you to preserve life. For these 2 years the famine has been in the land, and there are still 5 years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvesting. And God sent me before you to preserve a posterity for you in the earth, and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So now it was not you who sent me here, but God. And he has made me a father to Pharaoh, and lord of all his house, and a ruler throughout all the land of Egypt. Hurry up, go to my father and say to him, 'Thus says your son Joseph, God has made me lord of all Egypt. Come down to me, do not tarry.'" All right. So Joseph lets it all out. And kind of talks to his brother, allows them their shock that he's actually still alive, right? And give them time to kind of wrap their minds that this is actually possible, right? But we finally see this like relief coming out in Joseph, right? Lighter, he's able to speak the truth. Now let's look at our forgiveness sheets, right? Because clearly Joseph is here in phase 4. What elements in what Joseph said do you see in phase 4 of forgiveness?
He knows how guilty they feel about this. And he tries to relieve them and say it's not your fault, or not your fault, but don't blame yourselves. It is God who brought me here.
Okay, definitely.
And to discover the purpose of your life,
Mm,
you realize that God is the reason that he had to go there so he could save people
mm,
from famine.
definitely discovering a purpose. That's a big one.
Discovering the freedom of forgiveness. He just told his brothers who he was and told them, "Don't feel guilty. It's not your fault. It's ultimately God's fault."
Mm. Oh, God's fault.
God's fault.
God's purpose. There you go. All right, I remember when I was like a young deacon in the altar one time, and I was saying the responses. I don't know what happened to me, but you know how a lot of the responses are like, for the forgiveness of our sins. I think I remember I accidentally said for the forgiveness of your sins. The priest looked at me above the altar, so don't worry, I got one. Understood.
He's walking toward compassion because when he sees his brothers have compassion against his younger brother, and Judah is willing to sacrifice with himself for his younger brother, he has compassion for them.
Yeah, definitely.
He realized that they have to change it, and they are not behaving as before.
Yeah, I agree. Like they made every attempt to be honest men. Yeah. And I think also like he realized, I think George really hit this in week 4 of our study, where like he became a leader through the trials that he faced. So he saw that he needed to be trained in Potiphar's house. He needed to be trained in, in prison in order to get to this point to be second to Pharaoh. Right? So he saw that through his suffering that there was a purpose that he grew from it. And it put him in this position in order to be able to offer salvation to his family. Because he says, like, look, we're only in year 2 of this family. We got 5 more. You're either going to come here or you're going to die. Right? So he saw purpose behind his suffering. And there was definitely a freedom that came in his forgiveness. Because look how, like, we're looking at all these things that Joseph was doing, like, you are spies, and one is going to go and you're all going to stay here. No, one will stay here and you all can go, but don't come back with Benjamin. Okay, like, here, have a meal. Okay, I'm going to put the cup in Benjamin's place. Now I'm going to kill Benjamin, but no, I'm going to keep him as a slave and you guys go back. Like all this stuff, like Joseph couldn't keep it up. But now, like, when he kind of takes this final step of forgiveness, like, he's able to speak freely. Right? Say, like, look, I am Joseph. You did this to me. This was difficult. God used it. I'm here. Now bring the family. Like, he's able to speak openly. But when we hold on to a lot of our anger, like, our actions don't always make sense. But we're unable to just speak, freely to other people, especially to those that we've been hurt, from. So this process of forgiveness also, like, opens up that door to truth, right? And Scripture says that truth will set us free. So we see all these things kind of coming, coming to fruition in this process of forgiveness. Now, the last, like, I know I'm over. I'm going to summarize chapters 45, 46, 47, 48, 49, like this. All right. Jacob comes to Egypt and settles there. Joseph manages the rest of the family. Jacob dies in Egypt, but then, gives all of his children a blessing. And then Joseph asks Pharaoh to go back and bury Jacob in the promised land, because Jacob said, like, glad to be here, but don't bury me here. Bury me back in. Right? So that's what happens in 45, 46, 47, 48, and 49. Right? But what I started off, one of the questions at the beginning was, how do we know that we've really forgiven? And this is what I want us to close on. We're going to jump to Genesis 50. Okay? Genesis 50. And I'll read 15 through 21. Right? When Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, perhaps Joseph will hate us and may actually repay us for all the evil which we did to him. So they sent messengers to Joseph, saying, before your father died, he commanded, saying, thus you shall say to Joseph, I beg you, please forgive the trespasses of your brothers and their sins, for they did evil to you. Now please forgive the trespasses of the servants of the God of your father. And Joseph wept when they spoke to him. Then his brothers also went and fell down before his face, and they said, behold, we are your servants. Joseph said to them, do not be afraid, for am I in the place of God? But as for you, you meant evil against me. God meant it for good, in order to bring it about as it is this day, to save many people alive. Now therefore, do not be afraid. I will provide for you and your little ones. And he comforted them and spoke kindly. Right? I think Joseph, like how he comes at the end where, hey, Dad is now out of the picture. And he really has free reign to do whatever he wants. And the brothers like can't imagine, there's no way he actually forgave us. Right? That's their position. There's no way anybody could really forgive what we did. Right? And so they come up with their own ruse of like, let's tell him that Dad sent this on his deathbed. Right? But Joseph sees through it. And he now has like perspective. Right? Because even after they came, they settled, they lived life together, like time allowed for healing, it didn't erase what happened. Right? And we see that Joseph isn't going to them and saying, oh, what did you do to me? No, he knew what happened. Right? He didn't deny the past. But he is able to hold and the pain of the past, where God has put him, and say, okay, like I see this, and I see that God is really working. And I can hold on to this, but it's not going to now drive me. Right? In the middle of his forgiveness, pain was driving. But at the end, my pain wasn't driving. It wasn't gone, right? But it wasn't like making all the decisions. And so a lot of times when we're given like late opportunities to come back and even like show revenge, but yet we can show kindness, we can show love and compassion, right? And understanding. That's when we have, really like offered up a forgiveness. And that's the forgiveness of Christ. Right? There's never a time where he comes and holds it over us. Is the pain of sin always in the picture? Yes. Right? We never forget our sins. But he looks past it and he sees like, salvation that is coming, and he has compassion and he continually bestows on us gifts. Right? That's a sign when we have really, really like offered up forgiveness towards somebody. Sorry, went over a lot to cover. Any questions? Okay, let's close in prayer. In the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, amen. We thank you, Lord, for your blessing this day, for this opportunity to study your servant Joseph. There's so much to learn from his life, Lord. Help us to see our lives through his story. To know that you are forming us as leaders, that you are with us in our pain and suffering, that you are teaching us as you taught Joseph, preparing us for something greater. Help us to see that. Help us to work through our own forgiveness, and to always remember, too, that we are in need of your forgiveness, and we're in need of the forgiveness of other peoples that we have hurt. So help us to see both sides of our lives. Let's each person here continue to nourish us in the spirit of love and fellowship in our Bible study together. And help us to grow deeper in our relationship with you through this study, through the intercessions of all your saints. Please your friend in the beginning here, as we say, our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done. Earth is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. Forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Precious Lord, the man's kingdom, the power, and the glory forever.